What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, I want to show you the #1 game that Gukesh has ever played against his fellow Indian teammate Praggnanandhaa. Without further ado, this game is Gukesh versus Praggnanandhaa from the 2023 Wijk tournament. And here we go. In the game, Gukesh is playing as white. He opens 1c4, the English opening. Very interesting choice for this game, and Praggnanandhaa does go for the symmetrical English, starting with the move 1c5. Now we have knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and knight to c6. Both sides getting all of their knights out into the game. And now Gukesh, how does he want to play this position? Well, there are three main ideas. One is d4 immediately, breaking in the center. You can also go e3 and then d4. And finally, g3, attending bishop g2, and short castles is also playable. Now in the game, Gukesh, being a very active player, he plays the most active move in the position. That is just d4, breaking immediately and gaining space in the center. And now, of course, Praggnanandhaa, he will take on d4. So c takes, then knight takes d4. And now Praggnanandhaa plays the main move for black here. That is just e6, opening up this diagonal for the bishop, setting up ideas like bishop b4 and bishop c5, followed by short castles and maybe even d5. All very classical ideas. Now here, Gukesh, he has many different playable ideas in this position. For example, you can go, say, e3, bishop f4, I don't know, g3, and so on. But in the game, he plays the move a3, a very subtle waiting move. The idea behind this is you are taking control of that b4 square, stopping bishop b4 ideas. Now, that is very important if you want to go for a fast e4. For example, if instead you want e4 right away, then bishop e4 would pin that knight on c3 to the king on e1. Black would threaten knight takes e4. That would be just a massive disaster right away out of the opening. So a3, it guards b4, and it passes the ball back into Praggnanandhaa's court. So Praggnanandhaa here as black, how does he want to proceed? Well, there are three main moves here for black: bishop e7, bishop c5, and queen to c7. Now, surprisingly, in this position, Praggnanandhaa went for the most solid idea. That is just bishop e7, setting up short castles, and then maybe queen c7 or d5 once you are castled. So Praggnanandhaa, normally a very active player, choosing to play very solid in this game so far. All right, now, Gukesh, in this position, he does show his idea. You don't have to go e4. You can go, say, g3 or e3 instead. But sure enough, Gukesh, e4, the most active and aggressive move in this position, taking control of the center, and maybe even threatening e5 ideas later in the future if that square would be covered by a piece. All right, Praggnanandhaa, short castles. And now Gukesh, he's got a very important decision to make. It turns out here Praggnanandhaa is threatening the move d5, blowing open the center right away, as white's king has not castled yet. For example, if you go, say, bishop e2 or bishop e3, very natural developing moves, then black is in time to go d5 right away, and he would have an excellent game. Of course, Gukesh, being a potential future world champion, he knows this, and he plays the strongest move right here, right now. That is just knight to f3, retreating the knight and opening up the queen's access on the d-file to control the d5 square. Now black goes d5, then you take twice on d5 with the pawn. C takes, e takes, then e takes, and you do win a pawn for free. So knight f3, a very necessary move to control d5 with one more piece, that being the queen. All right, here, Praggnanandhaa, in this position, he has many ideas. Of course, d5 is not a good idea. Beyond that, though, you can just develop and play solid. For example, queen c7, d6, b6, and so on are all playable. But instead, sure enough, he goes for the most active idea here. Queen to a5, flying out with the queen, pinning the knight on c3 to the king on e1, and threatening knight takes e4, as again, that knight is pinned. And Gukesh, what does he want to do about it? Well, first of all, you cannot go b4. That move looks logical until you see black can go bishop takes or knight takes, as that pawn on a3 is pinned to the rook on a1. If you take on b4 with the pawn, you lose the rook. So that is no good. So with that in mind here, you must find a way to defend that pawn on e4. Now, one idea is just bishop d3, then going short castles and so on. That is perfectly fine. But Gukesh plays a very tricky idea against Praggnanandhaa. He goes bishop d2, lining up the bishop with the queen, and now the knight is no longer pinned. First of all, knight takes e4 would be a blunder. You recapture with the knight, as again, there is no pin. But beyond that, here, Gukesh, he has the idea of knight d5, jumping up with the knight, and here's the point. You can't take the knight because the queen would be under attack by the bishop, And if you move the queen, say queen c7, then knight takes e7 would win the bishop pair. Black can recapture with the knight, but then you do have those two bishops, and that would give white a very large advantage. So here, Praggnanandhaa, he must do something about this threat immediately. But what is he going to do? Well, you can go back, say queen c7. That is the solid choice. And then that bishop on d2 is a little bit misplaced. You don't really want it there. You may have to go, say, bishop e3, bishop f4, bishop g5, and so on in the future. However, here, Praggnanandhaa, again, being the very aggressive, active player that he is, he swings his queen over to the king side, queen to h5, putting pressure on that knight and the queen on d1 behind it. Now, if the knight moves, the queens will come off the board, and Praggnanandhaa will be just fine. All right, here, in this position, it is only move 10, and Gukesh plays a move that, I mean, I nearly fell out of my seat when I first saw this move by Gukesh. It's simply unbelievable. Now, normally here, white would go say, I don't know, bishop e2, bishop d3, bishop f4, then queen d2, and so on. But no, Gukesh, in this position, he plays the insane madman's move, rook to g1, setting up the g4 break. That is the only reason you would possibly play a rook g1 in this position. And very importantly, Gukesh, he cannot castle kingside. He moved his rook. His king's going to be stuck in the center or maybe going to the queen side, but his pawn's already on c4. His king would not exactly be safe on the queen side either. So Gukesh, he's going all in for the attack with g4 coming up next, and that would be a pawn sacrifice, mind you. All right, Praggnanandhaa, he knows that a flank attack is best meant by an attack in the center. So he breaks in the center with the move d5. His entire position is just begging for that move. And now, of course, the threat is d takes e4, winning a pawn on the spot, as that pawn would be defended once by the knight and only attacked once by the other knight. But Gukesh, does he care? No, he calculated everything out. And in this position, Gukesh, he plays the incredible move, g4, the star move of the game, hitting the queen with tempo. Here, black must capture that pawn. If you don't capture it, let's say you go queen g6, trying to defend. The problem with that is you take on d5, c takes, e takes, and then knight to h4. And believe it or not, the queen would be trapped. The g5, f5, h6, h5 squares, everything is covered. The knight would attack the queen. Therefore, you must take the pawn right now with the knight. So, knight takes g4 is the move. Now we have c takes and e takes, and then knight takes d5. So Gukesh winning back a pawn after Praggnanandhaa went d5, but giving up his g-pawn in the process. And now, very importantly, Praggnanandhaa, his king is relatively safe on g8. Of course, the rook on g1 is lining up with it. That will be very dangerous from later in the game. And Gukesh, his king on e1 could not be more naked. I mean, the rook's going to come to e8 very soon. He can't castle queenside. I mean, he can, but his king would not exactly be safe there either. So we're going to have an all-out dogfight for the rest of this game. This is going to be absolutely wild. All right, here, Praggnanandhaa. Bishop c5, by far the best move, and the very obvious threat here is bishop takes f2, forking both the king on e1 and the rook on g1. If black has one more move, he would play bishop takes f2, and that would be game over on the spot. Now, very importantly, you cannot block that attack with the bishop. Bishop e3 would be a massive blunder here for Gukesh. For example, black can just take, and then after f takes, the entire king side is being blown open. That is no good. So here, Gukesh, queen to e2 is the move. Defending with the queen. Now, real fast, can black take on f2? Is that a real threat? Well, it turns out the answer is no, but it's insanely complicated. If you take that pawn, believe it or not, the move for Gukesh, you take with the queen. Queen takes f2, and then if knight takes f2, here's the shocker. Knight to f6, forking the king and the queen as the rook pins the pawn on g7 to the king on g8. Therefore, g takes f6 is not a legal move. The king would be in check. Therefore, you do win back the queen immediately. So Gukesh, he calculated everything out. He knows queen e2 is sufficient to defend. Just unbelievable chess right now. All right, of course, Praggnanandhaa, he calculates that as well. He does not go bishop takes f2. Instead, the move is f5, a brilliant move, a multi-purpose move. First of all, you are threatening f takes e4, opening up the e file and the f file. And beyond that, bishop takes f2 is now a real threat, as at the very end of that line, if you go knight f6 check, hitting the king and the queen, The rook guards that square. Rook takes f6 would win the knight. Therefore, bishop takes f2 is a real threat right now. All right, Gukesh, he knows that. Knight to f4 hits the queen, the only move. Now the queen must move. If you go bishop takes f2, then queen takes, regains the piece, and then you are still threatening the queen on h5. So if knight takes, then knight takes, and white is doing just fine. So now here, Praggnanandhaa, queen to f7, retreating the queen. And now, Gukesh, the dust has settled a little bit. He is surviving, but he still has this threat of bishop takes f2 to deal with. He's got to find some way to deal with it right now. What is it going to be? All right, here, the best move is long castles, getting your king to safety on the queen side, but that is so incredibly hard to make as the queen of black has access to a2. That looks incredibly dangerous, but turns out it is the strongest move. Now, instead of that here, the move is rook g2, a perfectly reasonable idea, defending f2 with the rook. However, the computer does not like this one bit, and here the idea for black is going to be f takes e4, again opening up the e files and the f files. However, instead, Praggnanandhaa, queen to e7, lining up the queen on the e file with the queen and the king on e2 and e1, and this turns out to be quite a bit weaker because here Gukesh, he has the pawn sacrifice, e5, a critical move, keeping the f-file closed. Now that pawn on f5 is going to stay there forever. The f-file is staying closed, and that means the rook on f8 is a little bit less active, and Gukesh here, the advantage swings massively in his favor once again. All right, Praggnanandhaa, knight c takes e5, wins that pawn, and now Gukesh finally, long castles on the board, getting his king to safety on the queen side. His king is in time to get to b1. If black does threaten, say, queen e6, then queen to a2, again, white's in time to guard that square. He's doing excellent. All right, Praggnanandhaa here, he has many different ideas. You can take on f3 with the knight, but it turns out that is not very dangerous. There are other ideas, for example, knight f7, trying to get a queen trade, but that would favor Gukesh as well. Now instead, bishop d6 is the move, defending on e5 with the bishop, a solid choice, but now Gukesh, bishop c3, and look at this bishop. This bishop defends the queen side and attacks the king side. And of course, everything is lining up with that pawn on g7 of Praggnanandhaa. Gukesh has just the most ridiculous attacking game right now. All right, Praggnanandhaa here. He's got a critical choice. Again, there are a million different ideas. b5, rook e8, bishop d7, and so on. But in the game, he does take on f3. Knight takes f3, trading off a pair of knights after queen takes. And now, bishop to e6, lining up the bishop with the queen side, threatening ideas like bishop a2, and that would trap the king on the c-file. For example, bishop a2, rook c8, and so on, and all of a sudden, white's king could be stuck in a very vicious mating net. So for that reason here, white probably should capture on e6 immediately. Knight takes e6, however, instead, Gukesh plays a trickier idea. h3, trying to drive back that knight on the g4 square. All right, Praggnanandhaa, what's it going to be? How do you want to defend that knight on g4? Well, in the game, he does go bishop to e5, ignoring the threat, opening up an attack on the bishop on c3. However, this turns out to be a critical oversight. Instead, bishop takes f4 immediately was the right choice, then retreat the knight as that would put the king under check. Therefore, queen takes would be necessary. Now here, after bishop e5, Gukesh, he finds the right sequence. Knight takes e6, taking on e6 right away. And now if bishop takes c3, the intermediate move, then you take the rook on the f8 square. That would be devastating for black. All right, so instead here, queen takes e6 is forced. That is what Praggnanandhaa played in the game. But now, h takes g4 wins the knight, and Gukesh is officially up a piece. But of course, all is not lost for Praggnanandhaa. Here, of course, bishop takes c3 is the move, and now you must recapture with the b-pawn. If you take with the queen, then rook to c8 pings the queen to the king. Therefore, you lose the queen, and you cannot do that. So instead, b takes c3 is the necessary move. And now here, white's king is just naked and afraid, like my dad's favorite TV show, Naked and Afraid, like me at my middle school prom. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. All right, here, black, rook a d8, bringing over the rook. Then we have g takes f5 for Gukesh, putting pressure on the queen. And now here, what's it going to be for black? Well, turns out queen to a2, finally getting that move on the board is the right idea, and white's king again would be extremely vulnerable. However, instead, Praggnanandhaa, rook takes d1 is the move, trading one pair of rooks, a reasonable idea. Now if queen takes d1, and then queen to a2, again, flying in with the queen, but now with one less pair of rooks on the board. All right, here, Praggnanandhaa, his only chance is to create some mating threats against the white king. If he can't do that, that extra light square bishop for Gukesh is going to decide the game. So here, Gukesh, bishop d3, defending the pawn on f5 with the bishop, and the bishop's with an offensive and defensive piece, slicing across the board on the king side, but also defending on the queen side. Now here, Praggnanandhaa, rook to e8, excellent move, lining up the rook on the open e-file, but now Gukesh, rook g4, a solid choice, threatening ideas like rook to e4, and the rook would be blocking the e-file, and of course you cannot trade rooks in that scenario. The extra bishop would be worth too much, so that rook on e8 must stay alive. All right, here, Praggnanandhaa, queen takes a3, finally winning that pawn. Now we have king to d2, then queen b2 check, queen c2, and of course, Praggnanandhaa, he does not trade those queens. The queens must stay on the board if he wants to have any winning chances here. So with that in mind, queen to b6, retreats the queen, and then queen to a2 hits the king on the g8 square. Look at that sly queen move. All right, the king must move, king to h8. Then we have rook d4, lining up the rook on the d-file. Now, queen h6 hits the king once again. More sly queen moves by Praggnanandhaa. Now, king to c2, queen h2, threatening that pawn on f2. Praggnanandhaa keeping up the pressure. But now, Gukesh, he finds the best move by far. Queen to f7, more sly queen moves, this time threatening that rook on e8, and of course that threat must be respected, but not after first gobbling that pawn on f2. So queen takes f2, Praggnanandhaa winning yet another pawn. He is now up 2 pawns in this game, and he may have good counterattacking chances even in an endgame, as he would have 2 passed pawns on the a-file and the h-file. All right, now king b3 is the move, getting out of the check. But then rook to g8 defends for now. But now bishop c4, lining up the threat of checkmate on g8 with the queen. So the rook must move. Rook to b8 is the move, defending b7 in advance. But now queen to e7. What is the idea behind this move? It's very simple. Controlling h4 and setting up the idea of rook to h4, threatening ideas like, you know, who knows, rook takes h7 and so on. Things could get crazy. All right, now h5. Trying to guard against that threat, but now queen to g5, threatening queen takes g5. Now we have queen to f3, defending f5 with the queen. That was necessary, but now rook to h4, all the same. And what can Praggnanandhaa do? He gives one last check. Queen d1 hits the king moves, king to b2, and here, in this position, Praggnanandhaa resigns on the spot to Gukesh. He's out of checks. d2 and e2 are covered by the queen and the bishop, and that means there is nothing stopping rook takes h5, and it's going to be checkmate as the bishop guards the g8 square. Holy moly, what a game by Gukesh, starting on move 10 with the incredible move rook to g1, threatening g4, and then one move later, the key advance, g4. We need more arrows, all the arrows, but g4, the key move in this game. Gukesh, wow, what a game. And I sure hope he plays like this tomorrow against Ding Liren in the World Championship match in game number 1 as white. If you did, smash that like button, smash it right now. And while you're at it, check out this video right here, where Gukesh plays an unbelievable game against the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. If you love Gukesh or Magnus, check that video out. And stick around tomorrow when I cover the round number 1 of the World Championship match. You don't want to miss that. And I'll see you in the next video.